for transformation, and this discussion will be taking place within the framework of the outcomes of the recently organized Confintea 7 meeting, which took place 10 days ago in Morocco. For opening this session, I'm pleased to first give the floor to Mrs. Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everybody. Welcome at this second day of the pre-summit here in Paris, and welcome to this first side event of the day on adult learning and literacy and education as a lever for transformation, jointly organized by Unesco and the Kingdom of Morocco. It's really a great pleasure to me to be together again with His Excellency Minister Ben Moussa. I suppose he's connected. Yeah, I see. Minister of Education, Preschool and Sports of Morocco. Less than 2 weeks ago, I think, yeah. After the very successful big conference, intergovernmental conference, which has been held in Marrakech, I had the pleasure to be there with some of you. Especially, I wish to thank the President of the General Conference of UNESCO for being there, and other ministers of Finland, to be part of this discussion. I'm sure you remember it was an impressive response from member states, more than 140 countries being there to adopt the Marrakech Framework for Action, which is supposed to actually design the roadmap for the next decade. It's an ambitious document, as we need. It's an ambitious document which offers a vision, which offers a concrete roadmap and an action plan, I would say. And I see in this document a real, aspiration, ambition, and vision in action, so to say. I think that the topic of this summit is very much fitting on this discussion we are having in this first side event of the day. It's about transformation, as you know, how we can transform education and how through transforming education we can transform society. And I think that one of the key questions for our debate during this pre-summit, which is leading up to New York, is what does transformation look like? And Confintea 7 produced already valuable ideas, valuable insight to build our response. Let me pick up some points, at least in my understanding, my personal view of the importance of this framework for action. It's about the vision. Transformation actually must be visionary, first of all, and embrace a right to lifelong learning, creating a real culture of lifelong learning, as we said and repeat many times during the discussion in Marrakech. Transformation must also be a collective effort. Innovation is more at individual level, I would say. Individuals can innovate, but then to transform, you need a collective taking responsibility together. And creating ecosystems for making things happen on the ground. Transformation finally must place the learner, when it comes to education, at the center of the process and recognize the key and evolving role of educators and teachers. And this is another important component of the framework of Marrakech. Finally, I say transformation is also about investing more public resources in education, building on something which is already existing in some countries. We saw the good example of Morocco, which not by chance taking the leadership of this process, but of course it's about sustainability of funds. It's about also the international community helping to push for this part of the agenda. And maybe from this summit, expectations are that while we are leveraging the importance of foundational learning, that the lifelong learning dimension will not be left behind. This is the framework, this is the agenda you have, and unfortunately I cannot stay beyond these few words of welcome to all of you, as it's a very intensive day for us as a Secretariat, but let me first, before leaving, really warmly thank ministers who are here, Ministers of Education of Brazil, of Finland, of Mauritania, the Deputy Education Minister of Indonesia, and also, really last but not least, once again, the President of the General Conference, Ambassador Erazabal, for being present today, but also for being very much actively present in Marrakech with all of you. I hope really that the outcome of this discussion can be also brought up from this building, from this room first to the pre-summit plenary, and then from UNESCO and the Secretariat to the summit in New York. I thank you very much. I wish you a great discussion, David.
Thank you, Stefania, for this opening remarks on behalf of UNESCO. Je voudrais maintenant
I would now like to give the floor to Shakib Ben Moussa, who was a host in Marrakech for the 7th Confintea. Shakib Ben Moussa has been with us since Rabat. He's the Minister of Education of the Kingdom of Morocco. You have the floor, sir. Thank you, David. I don't know if you can hear me properly. It's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair of the General Conference, Assistant Director General for Education, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me, first of all, to thank you for accepting this invitation to a side event on learning and adult learning and education, which is co-sponsored by UNESCO and us. It's an event that is part of the pre-summit, which wants to transform education. We felt it was the opportunity to share a few things with you. That is the main lessons of the 7th conference, International Conference on adult education. And this is what we have to do for education. As Mrs. Giannini stressed, I want to emphasize the importance of taking part of, first of all, the success of the 7th Confintea conference. There was over 140 countries in plenary sessions, roundtables that were adopted, and we could adopt the Marrakech framework of action, showing the importance that all countries give to this particular topic. I'd like to stress again that all the topics in the framework of action are fundamental for the transformation of education. When we talk about having lifelong learning as the basis of a new social contract, when we talk about the governance of education systems for adults, with the mobilization of all stakeholders, with the construction or building that goes with it, with regular evaluation and monitoring, when we talk about funding, when we talk about the mechanisms that enable the most vulnerable categories to be included, or when we talk about broadening the areas or the fields of learning, adding new topics, new challenges, well, all this shows that the conclusions of Confintea and the Marrakech Framework for Action are important contributions to this pre-summit and on the whole thinking about transforming the education sector. But there are two initiatives I'd like to highlight because they were mentioned in the message of our King to the 7th conference. These two initiatives are about, first of all, setting up an African Institute for Lifelong Learning. This institute, well, let's say the objective is not to create or build a new building or new buildings, but to have a digital institute that will connect all actors on the African continent, actors who, through their actions, will promote lifelong learning. And they will help develop learning cities on the African continent. And there will be actions to strengthen or to build capacities that are aligned with the SDGs. And there will be cooperation between the members of the network around this African Institute, and we'll have events to try to better think about learning towns and cities in Africa, benchmarking what we do with what happens in the rest of the world. But we will make sure that everything is more operational and has more impact in the implementation of the Marrakech Framework for Action on the African continent. The second initiative is about setting up a post-Confintea ministerial steering group, Inter-Ministerial steering group, to promote adult lifelong learning, adult education, to mobilize resources and adult education, to suggest other measures in order to share experiences, best practices, and innovations, and at the same time to set up the proper conditions for the follow-up of the Marrakech Framework for Action. Here again, we don't want something cumbersome, but just a mechanism, an Inter-Ministerial Committee with a number of countries present, countries that will lead various missions, but we'll organize that through meetings and exchanges of ideas and information. And it could be done off-site or as side events to conferences taking place in the Unesco headquarters or elsewhere. We are convinced that these proposals will contribute to the success of the implementation of the post-Confintea framework. And the framework will be a pillar of this Transforming Education Summit and its follow-up. So this side event is an opportunity for us to exchange on the topics mentioned and to mobilize all stakeholders around the implementation of this Marrakech framework for action. Let me stress that again, that the Kingdom of Morocco is really committed to its implementation. Thank you for your attention. I'm terribly sorry, but because we have a high-level meeting of our steering committee just now, I will not be able to take part in the whole meeting or the whole discussion, but the ambassador is there and we have members of our mission as well that will be able to continue the discussion with you. And I hope that this side event will really contribute to the general mobilization for the follow-up of the implementation of the Marrakech Framework for Action. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Minister, for this introduction. We can already project ourselves in the post-Confintea period because we're beginning to think about the follow-up for the implementation of the Framework for Action that was adopted by the member states in Marrakech. And this is exactly what we will discuss this morning. But before I move to the presentation of this Framework for Action, I'd like to
members of a high-level panel that we have this morning before us. I'd like to welcome them, Honorable Santiago Erazabal, President of the General Conference of Unesco. It's an honor to have you with us this morning. You were also with us in Marrakech for the conference. Honorable Victor Godoy, Minister of Education of Brazil. You were also, one of the panelists in Marrakech, and we are very glad that Brazil is very active in the Confintea process, and it's, I would say, a continuity. The previous Confintea took place in Brazil, in Belém, in 2009, so very nice to see this continuous engagement from Belém to Marrakech. We're also honored to have with us Honorable Lee Anderson, Minister of Education of Finland, and Finland was also with us in Marrakech in the discussions, and Finland is also a very active, I would say, actor to promote lifelong learning, not only at home, but also globally. So, Madam Minister, we're very glad to have you with us for this panel. The Republic of Indonesia was also very engaged in the Confintea process, and we are pleased to welcome Mrs. Ibu Suharti, Deputy Minister of Education of Indonesia. Thanks, Madam, to be with us and also to give us the perspective on how Indonesia is actually promoting adult education and lifelong learning. Ambassador Samir Adare is also with us. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur du Royaume du Maroc, nous sommes heureux de vous avoir.
Your Excellency, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Morocco, we are pleased to have you here with us. I would also like to introduce Mr. Mahmoud, Director General of the National Agency Against Illiteracy in the Kingdom of Morocco. He is going to present some of the outlines which were presented following Confintea, and we have my colleague Werner Mosch, who is UIL head of a team, and he took part in the work of the drafting group which finalized the Marrakech framework of action text. So I would like to thank all the electoral groups which took place in the work of the drafting group of the Marrakech framework and all the people who took part during this conference to the final drafting of the text. So I'll give the floor now to Vanama to give us a presentation on this framework of action.
And thank you, Excellencies and colleagues, for giving us the opportunity to expand a bit on the Marrakech Framework for Action. I would like to ask the technique to start with PowerPoint presentation. I'm running quickly through the Marrakech Framework for Action, which was adopted by 142 member states. Next slide, please. So the Marrakech framework was adopted by 142 member states, and it supersedes the Belém framework for action, which was the valid framework since Confintia 6. And the Marrakech framework will accompany the international community of adult education for the next 12 years. It gives an overall framework for the work of member states to further reform and implement adult education at member states levels. The Marrakech framework is put in the framework of the overall 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the Marrakech framework should help member states to put in place adult education mechanisms that help also to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in general and SDG 4 for education in particular, and is also seen in the framework of the new social contract for education as mentioned by the International Commission for the Futures of Education. The framework has these 6 components. It looks into governance systems and what needs to be put in place to implement the framework, looks into the learning systems that are necessary and should be built for implementing and for giving adult education the appropriate possibilities. It looks into the funding possibilities and needs. There has been a commitment of member states to increase funding. That's just something I would like to send out. It looks into quality components and mechanisms that are necessary. It looks into the function to be an inclusive system, so that especially those who are usually not reached by education can take advantage of adult learning and education. They are the hardest to reach, but they give the most return of investments, as we meanwhile know. And it looks into learning domains that will need to be expanded further. Looking into frameworks and government arrangements, UNESCO would like to initiate consultations to strengthen the human rights with regard to lifelong learning in consequence of the new social contract for education. To translate the vision of a right to lifelong learning into reality, it's member states who are asked to put the right mechanisms on place with the overall game to strengthen multi-sectoral, to create a multi-sectoral platform for the governance of adult learning and education. Looking into systems of adult learning and education that should be created, strengthened at country level. So the Marrakech framework calls to strengthen the role of governments in establishing mechanisms and regulations and in allocating resources for adult learning and education. These mechanisms should regulate, incentivize, stimulate and coordinate adult learning and education as a public and common good, as stipulated in the report on the futures of education. Systems should reinforce institutional capacities for promoting lifelong learning for all at the local level, not only on the country level, specifically at the local level, where the music plays. And member states commit to creating flexible learning pathways so that learners are able to enjoy the necessary support they need for their own learning aspirations. The quality of learning should be ensured insofar member states committed to implementing policies and strategies to upskill and further professionalize adult educators, because it's them who are at the heart of quality aspirations in adult learning education. It's the same within the formal system, also in non-formal education. Quality is given by a well-qualified workforce, so it's especially the educators who need to be trained and with continuing education enjoy the right training. Member states commit to promote relevant, non-discriminatory and gender-responsive curricula and learning materials, as is foreseen in the overall framework of Sustainable Development Goals in principle. And they highlight the importance of conducting research and evaluation to guide policies to promote inclusion, quality and relevance. So implementation should be accompanied by research to continuously look into the work of the systems, whether it's appropriate and whether it needs some increased efforts. Increasing funding was one of the points that was under discussion at Marrakech, but member states committed to increase public funding and resource mobilization for adult learning and education. It's necessary to target the international benchmarks of at least 4 to 6% of gross domestic product and at least 15 to 20% of total public expenditure to education. These are old commitments that have been also already called in previous commitments. And the Marrakech framework includes a call for broadening the scope of global mechanisms for financing development cooperation, such as GPE, etc., so that adult learning is also part of these overall commitments, which are often focusing on formal education only. Promoting inclusion is one of the key principles of the Marrakech framework. Member states commit to placing diversity as a priority in increasing access to ALE among marginalized and disadvantaged people, and specifically underrepresented and vulnerable groups and communities. They commit to significantly increase participation in both non-formal and formal adult learning education programs, and member states the framework encourages countries to set ambitious benchmarks for the participation of diverse groups of learning, expanding learning domains, looking at the situation of adult learning and education. So member states commit to strengthen considerably the efforts to implement literacy policies to meet the SDG 4.6 targets. Member states commit to promote adult education for sustainable development and to advise awareness on the causes and effects of climate change, which was at the end also a major point within the overall discussions. And member states commit to identify ways to reduce the digital gap and to promoting digital literacy and skills. So there is this overall commitment by member states to use the framework as a reference document for the Transformative Education Summit, and that's why we are here also, because the Marrakech framework creates this direct link to use and to place adult learning and education as part of the Transforming Education Summit, and take the framework for action through relevant mechanisms at the global, regional, national and local levels, and fully using, and that's the last point, the transformative potential of adult learning and education for a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Merci Werner. Je voudrais maintenant passer la parole à Monsieur Mahmoud qui va nous apporter des...
I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Mahmoud, who is going to give us details on the future, on the initiatives which have already been taken by Morocco for the implementation of the Marrakech framework of action. You have a PowerPoint presentation that will be displayed. Thank you very much, Mr. David. Good morning to all of you, President of the UNESCO General Conference, ministers, honorable participants. I'm pleased to take part in this important meeting and to share with you the two Moroccan initiatives, the African Institute for Lifelong Learning and Post-Conflicte 7 Inter-Ministerial Committee. As the Minister of Education said it, these initiatives were announced within the framework of a message by the King of Morocco during the Confiteor 7 conference. We have the African Institute for Lifelong Learning, post-Confiteor 7 Inter-Ministerial Committee, and they are in line with the Marrakech Framework of Action adopted on June 17, creating a culture of lifelong learning and also interministerial steering mechanism for lifelong learning. For the African Institute of Lifelong Learning, what is it? Why? And how is it going to work? This is what I'm going to try to share with you. It's an African mechanism to develop, operationalize lifelong learning in a concerted and integrated manner at the African level. What are the missions expected from the African Lifelong Learning Institute? We have capacity building missions. Sorry. So, capacity building missions, advocacy and networking missions, promoting the observation, monitoring and evaluation activities, and to develop research and innovation activities. For the time being, there are 4 strategic areas of activities which are considered to be priorities on the basis of challenges and what has been already achieved. First, capacity building is one area. Then we have the African Platform of Learning Cities, which is important to develop all activities in the area of learning in connection with sustainable development. A third area is assessing adult education. The policy is very important. Educational policy is very important. It covers all levels, upstream up to downstream. And then we have the Observatory of Lifelong Learning. That is the 4th area. Now, the partners, as you've seen with Confiteor, this initiative started with a partnership convention with the essential partners of this initiative. Of course, it remains open to all partners to support and develop this institute. Of course, we have UNESCO through UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, and I would like to thank UNESCO for helping to organize Confiteor and for this initiative. And we also have the United Local Cities and Governments at the African level who are also involved, and we have different institutes in Morocco. So the second initiative mentioned by the Minister is the post-Confiteor 7 Inter-Ministerial Committee within the framework of lifelong learning. So I will present different elements about this commission. Its role is monitoring, promoting the implementation of the commitments and recommendations of the Marrakech Framework of Action. It is made up of the Ministers of Education, the countries, host countries of Confiteor, Denmark, Canada, Japan, France, Germany, Brazil, Morocco, the countries which have already conducted their midterm evaluation, Thailand, Korea, and all countries interested to join this commission. What are the missions? We have support missions to support the implementation of the Marrakech Framework of Action. Another mission is to make proposals It has to be a force to make proposals by way of initiatives likely to accelerate progress in the area of policies and strategies related to lifelong learning, advocacy for increasing public funding for lifelong adult education and learning, and also benchmark and sharing of experience and good practices in the area of adult lifelong learning. How is this Inter-Ministerial Commission going to work? Regular meetings once per year in Morocco. UIL will ensure the secretariat. We think that regularity is important, and UIL has a very strong, powerful convening capacity and is experienced. And Morocco will take in charge the operating expenditures of the Commission, and of course the Commission is not going to replace existing mechanisms, the GEM mechanism, global reports on education. This is only a mechanism to monitor the implementation of the Marrakech framework of action. So this is the role by the different players in the Commission. I share with you the fact that Morocco is going to play a role of facilitator and coordinator, take care of the logistic arrangements, participate in producing documents and deliverables for the Commission. The members of the Commission will make proposals by way of initiatives within that body. They will take part in mobilizing partners and donors for the implementation of the Marrakech framework of action. They will contribute to producing documents and also participate in practical mobilization missions, advocacy, favor sharing of experience, mobilizing expertise is on the side of Unesco, and also advocacy for adult lifelong education. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahmoud, for this presentation, showing that the framework of action is already a lively instrument, and that there is a new dynamics stemming from this in favor of adult education and lifelong learning, because this is a vision which is expressed in this new framework of action. Let me move on to the second part of our discussions with the panel.
Victor Godoy, ministre de l'Éducation du Brésil, qui va...
I'll start with Mr. Victor Godoy, Minister of Education of Brazil, who will tell us about his country and the framework for action.
I'd like to greet the President of the General Conference, Ambassador Santiago Mourão. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to participate in this event on adult education. I congratulate Unesco Institute for Lifelong Learning and the United Kingdom of Morocco for promoting with excellence the 7th edition of Confintea in Marrakech early this month. In my speech at the opening ceremony of the event in Marrakech, I highlighted that education in Brazil is a constitutionally recognized as a right and a responsibility of the state, the family, and the society. It has never been more urgent for these actors to get united to overcome the impacts of the pandemic for the learning of our students and for the future of our countries. Since the edition of Confintea held in Brazil in December 2009, the global scenario has changed significantly. The Belém Framework for Action encouraged us to strengthen public policies aimed at youth and adult education, to increase funding for this area and to strengthen partnerships with multiple actors and sectors. Sequentially, under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in particular the SDG 4 on quality education, in a post-pandemic scenario, Confintea 7 reinforced the need to boost funding for adult education, develop comprehensive and inclusive literacy policies, support teacher training, engage students in planning and implementing policies and programs. Beyond question, the discussions later reflected in the Marrakech Framework for Action demonstrated the need to recreate and innovate to overcome the obstacles imposed on humanity that directly affect education. The Marrakech Framework for Action, therefore, makes commitments to transform the right of lifelong learning into reality. It should be understood as an instrument to guide us in harnessing the transformative power of youth and adult education from a lifelong learning perspective for the achievement of a socially cohesive, rewarding, inclusive, and sustainable future for all. At the conference, the Brazilian delegation represented Latin America and the Caribbean in the drafting committee of the new Framework for Action. This commission was tasked with synthesizing and incorporating the country's suggestions into the preliminary document, giving synergy and coherence to the document that will guide youth and adult education policies around the world for the next 12 years. They also participated in the post-Confintea committee meeting, composed of countries that have hosted Confintea since 1949. On this subject, I would like to welcome Morocco's proposal to encourage the adoption of a forum for consultation with a shorter frequency on an annual basis, aimed to support the effectiveness and participatory implementation of the framework's recommendation. When considering the impact of the COVID pandemic situation, it is essential to recognize the importance of connecting SDG 3, health and well-being, and SDG 4, quality education, integrating youth and adult education and health in policies and sectoral programs. In this regard, the pandemic has drawn additional attention to the need for governments and communities to develop and implement strategies for acquiring knowledge, skills, and competencies, and learning policies that support youth and adults to deal with the effects of this crisis. It is vital, according to this understanding, to build strategies for reskilling and upskilling, which are necessary to meet the changing needs of societies and the world of work brought about, especially by digital transformation. Aware of the learning setbacks, the Ministry of Education of Brazil has focused on the mission of reversing the scenario and leading the country towards the necessary innovations for education. Adult education comprises people who did not have the opportunity to attend basic education in childhood and adolescence, and who are inserted in the labor market, even informally, or are unemployed. When they return to school, they demand a different curriculum proposal that meets both basic education and professional training for the world of work. It is up to us to make adult education more attractive and connected with professional education. In this sense, Brazilian government prepared a proposal for a lifelong education and learning policy. The initiative arises from the perception of the need to shelter in a normative instrument actions carried out in a dispersed way. The policy encompasses 5 dimensions: flexible, diversified, relevant, and qualified offer. Recognition of knowledge and skills learned in practice. Training of teachers on professional education. Access and permanence strategies. Cooperation with the local productive sector. Given the magnitude of the potential beneficiaries, Our policy is being constructed to focus on the most vulnerable population in the context of social and economic changes, and which additionally does not have completed the basic educational level. We've been working in the management and strengthening of this area of education in order to train people for the job market and quality for the workforce, going far beyond literacy. Brazil commits to work closely with those present here to reverse the current scenario in adult education in Latin America and worldwide. I hope we have a fruitful and productive work over the next pre-summit days. Thank you very much. Merci. Obrigado.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I think that indeed you illustrated in your speech how adult education can indeed be a lever for transformation. Thanks also for making this connection between the Belém framework for action and the renewed now framework that we have, taking into account the new challenges, the new context, in particular digitalization, climate change, but also this renewed need to focus on inclusion, which is a key element of the SDGs, but it's also, as we heard, a key dimension of the new policy that Brazil has just formulated on lifelong learning. So thanks for those words and those perspectives. I would like now to turn to Mrs. Li Andersson, Madam Minister of Education of Finland, also to give us your perspective on lifelong learning and on the framework for action that was adopted in Marrakech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I also wish to thank UNESCO and Morocco for convening the 7th Confintea, in which also Finland had the pleasure to attend. The Marrakech Framework for Action provides a strong call to invest in adult education and further strengthen the human rights-based approach. It provides relevant and up-to-date policy guidance to all countries, and above all, the framework emphasizes the key role of lifelong learning in sustainable development, which is extremely important at the time we live in. Excellencies, dear colleagues, as we know, we are living in the midst of rapid change and multiple crises. The climate crisis alone is an existential threat for the future of humanity and for the future of this planet. The way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we travel, as well as produce and consume, must and they will change. This means that new professions are emerging while others disappear. And climate crisis will demand a profound change in all areas of life, work, and our economies. The necessary green and digital transformations are dramatically shaping the skills and competences needed in life and in work. Circular economy and sustainable energy, food production and transportation systems, all of this requires manpower with a new set of skills. Continuous learning, also through civil society, plays a pivotal role in these transitions. All countries now share the same challenge. How do we ensure that everyone in society acquires the skills and the competences needed for a sustainable future? And a comprehensive sustainability transition requires that everyone will be prepared to develop their skills throughout life and career, and that everybody is given the opportunities and real possibilities to do this. The capacity to learn new things throughout life will be key in this change. It strengthens the resilience of individuals, of our organizations, and of society as a whole. And in Finland, learning to learn is one of the transversal competences that is emphasized throughout our formal education system, so starting already with the early years and small children. As one of the major reforms in Finland, we have recently updated our entire system of continuous education. This reform is still ongoing, and it was prepared as a parliamentary process, which means that all parties, government, opposition, participated and decided on it together. with the main finding that a systematic way must be created to and upskill our working age population. OECD has estimated that close to 500,000 Finnish citizens will need reskilling in the upcoming years. And this challenge, of course, requires a comprehensive and systemic approach for developing education, taking into account many policy sectors, not just education, but also social security, for example, labor market policies, working together with employers. Education systems need to cooperate very closely with working life. And one of the key questions is also how non-formal and informal learning can be more efficiently exploited. It is also pivotal to strengthen mechanisms for recognition of prior learning, also learning acquired, for example, through working life. Our vision is that in Finland everyone will have the opportunity, the tools and the motivation to develop skills and competence throughout careers and lives. This also requires emphasis on career guidance and counseling services for adults and youth alike. I've said that if you want to have lifelong learning, we also need to have lifelong counseling services for people to get information about the opportunities that society provides. We are great friends of system-wide flexibility, individual learning pathways, as well as support and guidance for learners. And we see that we need a broad range of different types of training to various target groups, including those groups that are presently underrepresented when we look at participation in lifelong learning and adult education. We also see TVET as a dynamic part, a very important part of our lifelong learning system, as roughly half of our TVET students at the moment are adults, so they are between 20 and 60 years of age. For example, energy, transport and land use are key sectors in climate mitigation, and they also have the greatest need for innovation and workforce with these new skills. Dear friends, to conclude, I also wish to emphasize the importance of foresight, of research and evidence. We have what we call a National Foresight Forum, which brings together key actors and stakeholders, also representing the world of work, for trying to assess the competence needs in the future, so that we focus also on doing the right things at the moment. To add, broad-based collaboration in all educational planning must be highlighted more than ever before. This is key to improve relevance, and we expect the Transforming Education Summit to convey a strong message in this regard, in line with the Marrakech Framework for Action and Unesco's Futures of Education report. Finally, our ability to innovate will be the best guarantee for a sustainable future, and therefore it's so important that we increase investments in education and training across levels, across all forms, and that we also do it in an efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Also, thanks for reminding us that learning to learn is maybe the key competence in today's world, and this is certainly something which is now increasingly at the core of education reforms, as actually illustrated by Finland. Also important to note that lifelong learning and education are not only about education, as also indicated in the case of Brazil. There is a need to have this inter-ministerial, intersectoral approach. I mean, it's a complex public policy which is about education, but also about social protection, about employment, about health and sustainability. So that's also the key element. I think those are elements I know which are also important in other parts of the world and in other context, and I'd like now to invite Mrs. Ibu Suharti, Deputy Minister of Education of Indonesia, to share with us the perspectives and policy directions followed to promote adult education and lifelong learning, as well as some feedback regarding the framework for action adopted in Marrakech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairs, and His Excellency Minister Chakib and Mausa, Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished colleagues. Let me begin by congratulating the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning and the Kingdom of Morocco for the successful organizations of the Conventia 7th. We would like to express our gratitude for the warm hospitality provided by the government of Kingdom of Morocco throughout the conference. Indonesia reiterates its support for the Marrakech Framework for Actions. The new instrument provides a roadmap for adult learning and education within a lifelong learning perspective within a vital area of actions, which are policies, governance, financing, inclusion, equality, and quality, as outlined also in the SDGs. I would like to share with you the Indonesia's effort in pursuing the SDGs 4, especially for the adult learning on education. First, the government of Indonesia has allocated a minimum of 20% of the national budget for education. So whenever the government increase its budget, then budget for education will increase accordingly to stay at least 20%. And this make it possible for the ministry to continue increasing the budget for adult life learning. The second, we underline the importance of the strong and multi-stakeholder partnerships. It has been proven as a key for the successful implementations of the Indonesian innovative pre-employment card programs. It was reported by our representative in Morocco 2 weeks ago. So far, we are proud that it has provided positive impact on improving competence, productivity, employment, entrepreneurship, and income of 12.5 million beneficiaries, which we strongly believe will keep growing. We also ensure the equality to all. The ministry also has non-formal education streams equivalent to primary to senior secondary education level, especially designed for adults who have not had the opportunity to pursue formal educations. This program is also based on the blended learning model that combines online learning and face-to-face learning, especially during the pandemic COVID-19, and also equipped with the structured skills, including entrepreneurship skills. The next, the strengthening synergy between the TVET education systems, training institutions, business and industrial sectors. Business and industry now have greater input into the designs, the curriculums, provisions of instructors also, and also the assessment. We involve industry on that matters. And to allow the educations and competency skills to be more aligned with the market demand in specific sectors. We also have a specific entrepreneurship educations and trainings conducted to develop the entrepreneurship capacities and mindsets among adults. The Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology now has 2 major programs in this adult literacy education programs, the employment skills education and entrepreneurial skills education programs. We also continue the programs of literacy program, adult literacy programs. Our literacy rate among adults has reached 97.8% actually, but we continue to combat the illiteracy among adults, particularly among elderly, poor, women in the remote area. So we would like to make sure that everyone in Indonesia have the ability to read and write, regardless their backgrounds. Excellencies, ministers, distinguished colleagues, emerging challenges, social, economic uncertainties, and environment and digital disruptions, as well as the existing national and global gaps and disparities, highlight the importance of the effective implementations of the Marrakech framework of actions. And despite progress, much more need to be done. We underscore the need for strengthening the collaborations and partnerships across sectors. It is time to step up our joint efforts. We all have the responsibilities to ensure the effective implementations of quality adult learning and education that will provide a strong impact not only on the health and well-being of the learners, but also contribute to a cohesive, inclusive, and sustainable future for all. In closing, Indonesia stands ready to work with all of the members for the effective implementations of the Marrakech framework. Thank you.
Thank you, and also for recalling the strategic role that adult education can play to promote access to employment, to reduce poverty, also to promote women's conditions and status on the labor market and in society. Also to know the particular emphasis that Indonesia places on remote and rural areas, and we know that this is a challenge in many member states, and I'd like also to note the role and the initiatives that Indonesia has been taken in this field under its the G20 presidency. So I think that I see a lot of synergy between those initiatives and now the Marrakech framework for action. I would like to now to turn to the President of the General Conference of UNESCO to give us, I would say, a broader perspective of the new framework for action in the context of, the positioning of UNESCO within also the, I would say, the global architecture in the field of education, and as also in the process that we are now facing in preparation for the TESS summit in September.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, our friend David Chorena, Director of the UIL, and thank you for all this, the presence of all of the ministers that are here, that are very welcome to this event in this summit here in Paris. And the presence of all these ministers shows the importance and the necessity of taking action very quickly in the realm of education in order for us to cope with the challenges that we are facing in the next future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here and to participate in this pre-summit side event to share some of the views on the 7th International Conference on Adult Education that was held in Morocco, in Marrakech lately. I wish to take this opportunity once again to commend the Kingdom of Morocco for hosting the conference and for all the support it provided to ensure the event was a success as it was. Adult and lifelong education must be, and we know that, at the core of all efforts to transform education. It is fundamental to empower individuals with the main skills to act and behave in our fast-changing societies. It is in particular an integral part of the Sustainable Development Goal 4 of ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education for all. And as we have heard here, and we have heard since Marrakech and Belém, this is not only about giving a second chance for adults so that they can catch up for the lost time by getting access to basic skills as reading, writing, and counting. It is also that, but it's not only this aspect. As we have heard here from the responsible for education of countries that represent across the world, all the regions that are here, Brazil, Finland, Indonesia, Morocco, and as we have heard also in Marrakech, efforts in lifelong learning is about preparing every woman and man to use new, higher-level competencies as a source of constant dynamism. This is why we need to close the divide, the digital divide, to bridge the gap between knowledge and lifelong learning. Digital competencies and skills must be integrated as part of adult education to improve access to knowledge and information. This vision is fully aligned with the UN Secretary-General approach of transforming education as presented in the Global Common Agenda that we start thinking about and we start working for in this very pre-summit meeting here in Paris. That is why this meeting is important. And again, I want to thank all the ministers of education that have answered to this call and are here today and tomorrow to discuss all these issues. In this spirit, the 7th Confitea was a timely opportunity to renew the commitment of making adult education a lifelong learning, a reality across the world, to ensure every adult has equitably access to quality, inclusive education. The Marrakech framework of action, as has been reminded to us that we have reviewed the importance of this document, a very ambitious document, designs concrete strategies for development of adult education on priority issues as equal access, women's literacy, digital learning, climate change, and what is important also has created and has been proposed by Morocco a sharper monitoring and evaluation process and the creation of this Inter-Ministerial Commission that we believe it's a very, very timely idea, so we can all the time be checking the results of the efforts that the whole community is doing in this regard. I believe that the UNESCO member states gathering in this important event have the great responsibility to advance this vision and work to change mentalities. This is why, as President of the General Conference, I engaged to incorporate the recommendations of Marrakech and all the recommendations that come out of this exercise in the follow-up discussions of the Transformation Education Summit. So we are going to channel that to New York so as being part of the reflection that we have done here in Paris. We cannot make definitive progress to transform education without including adult education as an essential part of this movement to integrate education, sustainable development, and lasting peace as a single one agenda. Thank you very much. Obrigado.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recalling I would say, the globality, but also the magnitude of the challenge, included by also referring to the key contribution of adult education to peace. I mean, this is, of course, a very important dimension. I would like to recall that the first Confitea was in Denmark in 1949, so just after Second World War, and it was indeed at that time a very important element of the debate, and it is an element that we need also to keep in mind today. I would like now to open the floor to other delegates and participants. We have a few minutes for exchange. Madam, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the honorable ministers and speakers who shared their insights this morning. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. We're the global voice of the library field. In many countries, the initial development of adult education and that of public libraries was one and the same thing, and breaking down barriers, reaching into communities, and giving the possibility to people outside of the formal education system to learn and develop their skills was and continues to be at the heart of the mission of libraries, as stated in the UNESCO IFLA Public Library Manifesto. In the spirit of avoiding duplications and streamlining efforts to continue harnessing the transformational power of adult learning and education, we urge member states to recognize the efforts already taken in libraries around the world and to include libraries in national and local level strategies for lifelong learning. And we are keen to work together to uphold the commitment within the Marrakech framework to promote inclusion by facilitating the exchange of knowledge between government and non-governmental institutions, civil society, and member states. And within our global federation, we plan to do our part towards the formal recognition of the right to lifelong learning by starting work on developing a manifesto on the role of libraries in lifelong learning, which will act as a cornerstone for galvanizing our sector's contribution, mobilizing our network's advocacy, and promoting further commitments. So to close, IFLA affirms our ongoing dedication to working with UNESCO, member states, and all stakeholders to further work towards achieving this knowledge exchange and co-creating the realization of the transformational potential of adult learning and education together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this contribution. I'd like also to take this opportunity to thank IFLA for organizing one of the thematic workshops during Confinter in Marrakech. Any other intervention? Je ne vois pas de...
I can't see any request for the floor. So I'll turn to the ambassador of Morocco, Mr. Adare. You have the floor to react to the contributions which were made by the ministers and also by the president of the General Conference. And maybe also make some comments by way of conclusion of our meeting. Thank you, David, Excellencies, Ministers, President of the General Conference, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First, I would like to congratulate you for the success of Confitea 7 in Morocco, and also congratulate ourselves as member states, because it's thanks to our efforts, interactions, contributions, and we've heard very fruitful contributions today that we were able to provide the Marrakech framework of action, setting the score for the next 10 years. We've worked with you, of course, UIL. This is actually a long journey that led us to Confitea 7, and I'm pleased that we developed the Marrakech framework of action, which is going to be a beacon for the next years in the area of adult education. Many interesting things were said. I don't want to repeat them. I'd like to say that the asset of the Marrakech Framework of Action adopted by 142 member states, it is within the framework Belém, and I'd like to congratulate Brazil for its commitment, and I'd like to thank you, and through you, thank the government of Brazil. As I said, this Marrakech framework of action is based on the Belém framework of action. It's a continuity, and it allows for adult education, is consistent with the Agenda 2030, and more particularly SDG 4. And as Mr. Werner said, the themes chosen, governance, learning systems, funding, quality, inclusion, were also discussed by the different speakers. And learning, they're building basic elements which are the basic principles of the organization and the UN human rights. It's also human rights in development. It's actually within UNESCO's vision. We need to continue promoting human rights and promoting women in rural and remote areas, and strengthen the role of governments in establishing mechanisms and regulations. I think that we all agree on the need to have this commitment, which is essential, and also, of course, allocating sufficient funding. This is really crucial if we want an effective implementation of Marrakech framework of action. Also, strategies for reskilling, promoting teaching material which is not discriminatory, and ensuring that we empower women in rural areas, increasing funding, as I said, strengthening diversity. Vulnerable groups are also covered in this framework, promoting education for sustainable development, reducing the digital divide. These are all areas on which we need to work during the next 10 years. And I'd like to say that the initiatives are taken by and presented in the message of the Kingdom of Morocco, the African Institute for Lifelong Learning, to strengthen South-South cooperation in the area of lifelong learning. Africa, as you know, is a priority. And this initiative is in line with UNESCO's mandate, and I'd like to thank you. And I am really pleased that the 142 member states supported this initiative. And we have the post-confité, a 7 Inter-Ministerial Committee to monitor the effective implementation of all the recommendations formulated in Marrakech Framework of Action following the conference. And they are at the same time a force to come forward with initiatives, and this will enable us to feed into the discussions.
This commission will have a secretariat provided by UNESCO, will provide its expertise in lifelong learning and adult education, will meet in Morocco, and Morocco is committed to contributing, or in fact to cover all the expenses of this commission. There's also a call for a new social contract for education so that we have a fair and sustainable future. And we know through our mandate here at UNESCO that the future is built in the mind of women and men, and peace is built through education by providing men and women the intellectual and educational tools that will promote peace and maintain it over the long term. We're committed to the right to lifelong education. We want to increase the participation of young and adults in learning, because education is a common good. It is our common good. And inclusion should be at the heart of this effort, so that the people who are most often left behind do benefit from lifelong learning. One of the conclusions of the 5th report by UNESCO on education, on adult education, and we know that those who most need it are not always the beneficiaries. So we need upskilling and reskilling to take up the challenges of change due to climate change and technological change and changes in the world of work. We need to increase funding of learning and adult education, especially after the pandemic. That put a lot of pressure on national budgets. But we still have a lot to do. Policies should have a holistic approach of education, and we want a transforming and inclusive education that will not exclude women. We must strengthen adult education with justice, human rights, democratic values, and other values that are interpersonal. Literacy is recognized as the basis for lifelong learning and a lever of education throughout life. But this is vital to overcome the global crisis we experience at the moment. So we must have better and more teachers and providers of literacy, and also take up the funding challenges. The world of work is changing, and it will continue to do so in the years to come, and therefore we need flexibility in the learning pathways and in lifelong learning. And with TVET, we must have an offer of decent work for the young people and the adults, but take into account the needs of the labor market. The Marrakech framework is aware of the need for equity and the digital divide to be overcome. We have global or international tools to guarantee access to knowledge, connectivity, in particular for personalized learning. We should have a culture of lifelong learning, and we are also committed to promoting the recommendations of the Marrakech Framework for Action. And in September 2022, we'll have a good reference document for the next decade. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you, Ambassador.
I would like also to reconfirm that, of course, UNESCO will be fully mobilized to work with member states for implementing this new framework for action. We welcome the initiatives launched by Morocco at Confintea with this, the establishment of this Institute for Lifelong Learning in Africa, and UL will indeed collaborate to its implementation. We also look forward to the further steps in the discussions for the implementation of this Inter-Ministerial post-Confintea committee, and we noted with satisfaction that Brazil is fully supportive of this initiative, and we will continue the discussion with the other member states that have hosted Confintea or midterm reviews in the past. One of the strong conclusions of Confintea, which is also reflected in the framework for action, is this call to extend the right to education so that it becomes really a right to education throughout life. So that's an important step. As you know, we have been celebrating the 60th anniversary of the 1960 convention, the Unesco Convention Against Discrimination in Education, which is a centerpiece for the right to education. We think that it's now the right time to continue this discussion to see how this normative framework can be further extended to fully recognize and facilitate in member states the recognition of the right to lifelong learning. Another important element that we'll continue to explore and work with member states to put in place is to ensure that at global level the discussion around the SDG 4 takes fully also account adult education. As we speak, the steering committee of SDG 4 is actually meeting. A number of ministers are actually participating, including Minister Ben Moussa, and we of course count on them as well to ensure that the discussion on the initiatives for promoting SDG 4 actually, recognize the holistic vision of SDG 4, which is lifelong learning opportunities for all. And I think that this is a very important message, and there is a need to maintain this vision and this direction, including when it comes to funding. Mr. Ambassador, you did remind us that we are, regarding funding, of course, in a difficult time, the post-pandemic context, but also the international context, which is actually already resulting in the redirection of some funds that were actually earmarked for international cooperation to other, in fact, areas. This is a concern for the international community, for the UN system as well, and we hope that in moving forward there will be, I would say, sustainable solutions that will be found, so to ensure that support to education, and including adult education, will continue to be given adequate support. And ministers, we of course count very much on you to help also the international community to maintain this direction and to actually implement the commitments that have been made now in Marrakech. So I would like to thank you, Mr. Godoy, Madame Anderson, Madame Suharti, for your participation. I'd like also to thank Mr. Mahmoud and all the entities in Morocco who have been contributing to Marrakech, including the National Commission for UNESCO, Mr. Secretary General, who played also an active role in the organization of Continfintea 7, and we are also grateful to the President of the General Conference of UNESCO for his continued support. So thank you for this, for your participation in this event, which is again a side event, but it's a side event about I would say a core element of the discussion about education, and we hope that it will continue to be also a central piece in your discussions later today, tomorrow, and in September with the head of states in New York. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.